We all want to know. When an organization says it's tackling the world's biggest problems, how do we really know if they're making a dent?
Right. What's the real story behind the glossy reports?
What's the difference between genuine impact and, well, just the appearance of it?
That's the crucial question we're diving into today because it's so important to look beyond the headlines and understand the inner workings of these groups.
Exactly. And that brings us to the Altru Institute. This New York-based organization popped up in, what, 2017?
Yeah, 2017, they called themselves a philanthropic think tank.
A think tank focused on scaling up humanitarian ideas, solving global challenges through collaboration. Basically, connecting the right people.
That's the pitch?
Now, for you, our listener, who wants to get to the heart of the matter quickly, without getting bogged down in endless reading, this deep dive is your shortcut. We're going to explore the Altru Institute's operations, try to get a clear sense of how trustworthy they seem based on the info we have.
And we've gathered some, well, pretty compelling material. We'll be looking closely at an expert analysis called the Altru Institute, assessing the trustworthiness of a philanthropic network.
Okay, so an objective look.
Hopefully. It looks at their structure, their claims, and then we also have a really fascinating personal account.
Oh.
It's from someone named Arviell Simmons, titled The Altru Illusion, My Experience Behind the Curtain of a Humanitarian Facade. So a first-hand perspective.
Wow, okay. That sounds like it could be quite revealing.
It definitely offers a different angle.
So our mission today is clear. Dig into these sources, pull out the key insights. What does the Altru Institute say it does? How does it actually operate?
How open are they? What's the real impact?
Exactly. By the end of this, you should have a much sharper understanding, be able to form your own informed opinion. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with their stated mission. What are they all about on paper?
Well, according to their public statements, the Altru Institute's main goal is to be a hub. Yeah, connecting innovators in the humanitarian space, curating their ideas, and ultimately helping to scale up effective projects.
And how do they do that? What's the main method?
Their primary way seems to be through building networks, bringing people together.
Right, and their most visible effort there is that annual meeting, isn't it? The one near Davos.
Exactly. Held at the same time as the World Economic Forum. It's clearly a strategic choice of location and timing.
You can see the logic be where the influential people are.
Precisely. And beyond that big event, they also run these thematic consortia.
They're working groups.
Kind of. Focused on specific challenges. There's the Ultra Climate Project, initially quite focused on hydrogen, apparently.
Okay.
The Ultra Global Virus Project, which, popped up during the pandemic.
Makes sense.
And there's even talk of a planned Altru Leadership Academy, supposedly in collaboration with the UN.
Ambitious.
These consortia seem to be their main structure for fostering collaboration in specific areas.
So what really stands out then is they position themselves as a facilitator, right?
Oh.
A connector.
Yes.
Not someone actually running the projects on the ground or writing the big checks themselves.
That's a really important distinction. It's all about the power of the network as they see it.
Which, okay, that model exists, but it leads us to some potential issues, right? Particularly around transparency.
That's certainly what our sources suggest. The expert analysis points out their nonprofit status. They're a 501c.
Okay, and for listeners not up on U.S. tax code, what does that mean, practically speaking?
Well, the key difference compared to, say, a 501c3 charity is that a C4 generally has less stringent public disclosure requirements.
Less disclosure about what?
Especially concerning who their donors are and the specifics of their finances. They also have more leeway for lobbying.
Ah, okay, so that's really interesting. It means we don't necessarily get the same window into their funding or spending as we might with a more traditional charity.
Exactly. Unlike a typical charity with strict rules on transparency, a C4 can be, well, a bit more opaque.
And the expert analysis highlights this.
It really emphasizes this lack of readily available information. We're not seeing publicly accessible audited financial statements.
Right.
Or detailed IRS Form 990s beyond the basics, or those comprehensive annual reports you'd usually expect.
Things that would normally show the budget, spending, where the money's coming from.
Correct. And the absence of these isn't just like a minor detail. It fundamentally hinders anyone's ability to see how donor money, if they have donors in the traditional sense, is being used.
Or if their operations are even financially sound. It definitely raises a bit of a red flag, doesn't it?
It does, and it seems independent scrutiny is also lacking.
How so?
Apparently, rating agencies like Charity Navigator,
Yeah.
the ones that assess charities, they don't currently evaluate the Altru Institute.
Any idea why? Is it the C4 status or just lack of data?
The analysis doesn't spell it out, but it likely connects back to that lack of easily accessible data, or maybe their specific structure.
Okay. And the analysis mentions something else about funding,
Yeah.
something unusual.
Yes, this idea of success fees.
Success fees, what does that mean?
Well, some information suggests the Institute might generate revenue from the commercial successes of its members.
Wait, so if someone makes a connection through their network and it leads to a successful business venture?
The Institute might get a cut. If that's true, it raises some really important questions about potential conflicts of interest, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Is the primary aim truly altruistic? Or is there a significant commercial driver that's not entirely upfront?
That's the core question it raises. It definitely blurs the lines of what you typically expect from a philanthropic organization.
Okay, so big questions around financial transparency. What about the actual difference they're making? Is there proof of impact?
This is another area where the sources express concern. The expert analysis points to a real scarcity of publicly verifiable data showing concrete outcomes.
So not just networking events, but actual results.
Exactly. Things like documented policy shifts or technologies actually being scaled up measurably or clear improvements in the humanitarian issues they target.
And we're not seeing much evidence of that independently.
Apparently not. It sounds like a lot of the success stories come from their own channels.
Their website, their own reports, maybe testimonials they've gathered.
Precisely. Which, might be perfectly true, but they lack that crucial independent confirmation.
Right, you need someone else looking in from the outside.
And the analysis also notes there's limited independent media coverage or deep academic research on the Altru Institute's activities.
So not many people digging into whether this networking model actually works.
It makes it hard to know objectively if their projects and consortia are truly leading to scaled solutions or if the main result is just more high-level connections.
It's a fair question to ask. Okay, so mission, transparency concerns, verifiability questions. What about the people running the show? Who's behind the Altru Institute?
It was co-founded in 2017 by Brett Johnson, the current CEO, and Mariam Ezarm.
And Brett Johnson's background.
Described as being in entrepreneurship, experience across different industries. His leadership profiles tend to really emphasize his skills in networking.
Okay. The connector role again.
Right. Bringing diverse groups together for global problems.
Does the analysis say anything else?
Well, it does mention that some critical sources point out a lack of maybe a really extensive publicly documented track record in nonprofit management or large-scale humanitarian work before he started the Institute.
Okay. Something to bear in mind.
Definitely.
And what's it like inside? Any sense of the internal dynamics?
The expert analysis touches on this, mentioning a limited number of employee reviews on sites like Glassdoor and Indeed.
Ah, the usual places.
Yeah.
And what do they say? Is it glowing?
It seems mixed from what little is available.
Next how?
Some people mention positive things, especially the networking opportunities, being involved in interesting-sounding projects. But there are also criticisms. Issues with management communication, sometimes described as a terrible culture. Leadership making promises they don't keep. Unmet expectations. Particularly around compensation for contractors.
That sounds like it connects to some of the negative Trustpilot feedback mentioned earlier, too.
It does seem to align, yeah. Which leads us very neatly into that personal account from Arviell Simmons.
Right, the Altru illusion piece. This gives us a much more detailed first-hand look, potentially.
Exactly, a very different perspective.
Okay, so tell us about Arviell Simmons. How do they get involved?
Simmons describes being hired as a blockchain researcher by Brett Johnson back in 2021.
Blockchain for humanitarian purposes.
That was the initial idea, yeah. Simmons mentions a $40,000 annual salary being discussed, potential bonuses, even the chance to get paid to educate myself further.
Sounds pretty good initially.
The task was to build a database of companies using blockchain for good with a long-term goal of some global initiative. And for the first few weeks, Simmons says it went smoothly. Consistent payments.
But then things changed.
According to Simmons, yes. A significant turn. Brett Johnson apparently started pushing for much faster timelines for vetting the data.
Faster than was realistic.
Simmons felt so, warning it would impact quality and accuracy. The feeling was pressure to produce quick results, maybe to show progress to sponsors.
Appearances over substance.
That was Simmons's interpretation, prioritizing speed over thoroughness.
Okay. What else happened?
Then came the issue of bringing on more researchers. Simmons was asked to hire friends.
Right.
But instead of setting fair wages, Johnson allegedly told Simmons to research the cost of living in different places.
To find the minimum possible pay.
That's what Simmons claims Johnson wanted. Simmons pushed for at least minimum wage, but says this became a point of friction and it also started affecting their own pay.
Oh, how so?
The account details a pattern emerging: inconsistent, incomplete payments to Simmons, just enough to keep them working, but never the full amount owed.
And the reason given?
Johnson reportedly claimed funding issues, but at the same time was asking for more work and shifting Simmons' focus away from blockchain.
Shifting to what?
More vaguely defined, high-level strategic planning sessions.
So, less concrete research, more meetings. While the pay is becoming unreliable.
That's the picture Simmons paints. It apparently got so bad Simmons lost their apartment due to the unreliable payments.
Wow.
And even had to cover wages for the research team Johnson had underpaid just to protect their own reputation.
And Johnson's reaction?
According to Simmons, Johnson didn't seem particularly concerned.
That's quite an account.
It's a concerning picture, yes. Simmons eventually took a break for a few months, tried to stabilize things, even started a small business.
Okay.
And interestingly, when Simmons asked Johnson for some networking support, the thing the Altru Institute supposedly excels at,
I guess.
Simmons says they received no help at all, which led to their first major doubts about this famous network.
Understandable. Did they reconnect later?
Apparently, yes. Johnson reached out again, apologized for the past issues, claimed the funding problems were solved.
A fresh start.
Well, the new offer was for minimum wage, part-time hours, and a completely new field: clean tech and energy.
Why the shift?
Johnson apparently said the funding dried up for blockchain. Constant shifts.
So Simmons is essentially starting over again in a new area.
Despite all this, Simmons describes developing quite an advanced relational database system for this new clean tech focus.
Okay, so still producing valuable work.
But Johnson allegedly didn't grasp its capabilities, wanted it simplified into just a basic spreadsheet.
A spreadsheet?
Yes, while also wanting to monetize it, put it behind a paywall with different data access levels.
So simplify the tech, but charge for access. The account from Simmons gets quite stark here. Claims their pay dwindled sometimes to as low as $100 a week.
$100 a week.
While Johnson was reportedly traveling to Davos, attending luxury retreats, yet still claiming to be short on funds and asking Simmons for more unpaid work. That contrast is pretty striking. It really makes you wonder about resource allocation.
It certainly does. And the story takes another twist. Simmons re-entered the AI field, started having some success.
Okay.
Johnson noticed this and apparently tried to leverage Simmons's new AI skills.
How?
To train AI agents that could basically automate the research Simmons had been doing for years.
For the Institute.
Yes. The promised benefit for Simmons was increased visibility, portfolio value.
And did Simmons do it?
According to the account, yes. Put in several weeks of work. But then Johnson dismissed the solutions as too complex.
Took the ideas anyway.
Simmons claims Johnson took the underlying concepts, reframed them, and then essentially ghosted Simmons.
Ghosted. Just stopped communicating.
Ignored emails, suggested Simmons should talk to a new director, basically cut contact.
Wow. Was there any confrontation?
Simmons describes one. Johnson's response was reportedly dismissive, avoiding responsibility.
Yeah, the past payments.
Johnson apparently claimed the partial payments made earlier were charity. His personal definition of altruism, according to Simmons. Simmons also staged Johnson later repackaged their old blockchain research for a volunteer-led platform.
Which Simmons says wasn't volunteer-led, but mostly their own paid or underpaid work.
That's the assertion, that Simmons did the vast majority of that research.
So the final word from Simmons is?
A strong warning. Be very cautious about working with the Altru Institute. Cites broken promises, lack of substance. It's a serious accusation.
It really is. And this personal story seemed to amplify the concerns from the expert analysis about transparency and management, doesn't it?
It does. It provides a very specific, detailed narrative that aligns with some of those broader external critiques mentioned in the analysis.
Like that Substack article, The Altru Institute Unmasked.
Yeah, that piece also pointed to the general lack of independent scrutiny the organization has faced.
And the analysis summarized points from Arviell's own Medium articles too, right?
Correct. Highlighting inconsistencies, questions about the funding model, allegations of misleading people about the programs.
It paints a picture of Well, potential misalignment.
And we see this split opinion reflected elsewhere, too, like those Trustpilot reviews the analysis mentioned.
Right, a real mix. Good networking experiences on one side.
And then very negative reviews on the other, alleging poor treatment of contractors, questioning the exclusivity, suggesting it mainly caters to a wealthy elite.
So not a unified public perception at all.
Not really, and the expert analysis tries to crystallize this with that comparison table.
Ah, yes. The table comparing their stated position versus typical expectations and the observed reality.
Exactly. It really highlights the discrepancies. For instance, they call themselves a philanthropic think tank.
But the 501c status and the focus on networking maybe doesn't fit the typical think tank mold of deep research and policy work.
That's the question it raises. Their primary activity is convening, connecting. The expectation for philanthropy might lean more towards direct programs or grants.
And the financial transparency gap is stark in that comparison too, isn't it?
Very stark. The lack of public, detailed financials versus the standard expectation of audited statements for accountability.
That table sounds like a really useful summary of the core tensions.
It really brings the key issues into focus. Impact assessment, accountability, reputation.
They state their goal is scaling humanitarian ideas.
But there's that noticeable lack of independently verified data to back it up.
They claim accountability to their network and mission.
But external oversight mechanisms seem limited.
And their desired reputation as a global connector for good.
Seems quite divided, with positive networking feedback clashing with serious concerns about their operations and ethics.
Okay, so after digging through all of this, the mission, the transparency issues, the impact questions, the leadership, Simmons account, the critiques, what are the key questions that really jump out at you now?
I think the central questions really boil down to, can we trust this organization? How transparent are they really? And can their impact be independently verified? Based on everything we've looked at, can you confidently say the Altru Institute operates with the openness and accountability you'd expect from a group claiming to be philanthropic? Is their networking model genuinely scaling effective solutions? Where's the clear evidence?
And maybe the toughest one. Do their internal practices, like those described by Simmons, align with their public mission?
Exactly. Those are the core questions that seem to remain unanswered, or at least clouded by doubt.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways for you, our listener, to hold on to?
I think number one is the Altru Institute's strong focus on high-level networking. That's clearly their main game.
Okay.
But number two, there are significant concerns about their financial and operational transparency. Big question marks there.
Right.
Three, we've noted a lack of independently verified impact data. Makes it really hard to judge their effectiveness.
And finally,
that personal account combined with other critiques paints a pretty critical picture of their internal practices and raises flags about alignment with their stated mission.
it really seems that while the Altru Institute presents this compelling vision, creating global good through connections,
Which sounds great.
the information that's actually available publicly raises some pretty serious questions about their methods and ultimately their effectiveness.
Which leads to a bigger thought for you, the listener, to consider when it comes to making a real difference.
Yeah.
Is the most effective path always through these kinds of exclusive high-level networks? Or does true impact more often come from organizations prioritizing transparency and direct accountable action on the ground?
That's a really good point. Different models of change, right? And how do we, as observers or potential supporters, evaluate the claims organizations make?
It's something worth mulling over. How do you weigh the promise of connection against the need for clear proof and accountability?
Definitely food for thought. And if you want to explore this further, check out our notes. We've put some recommended further exploration questions there.
Yeah, you could look into transparency standards for 501c(a)ish generally, how you even measure the impact of networking nonprofits, critiques of forums like Davos, or maybe dig deeper into Brett Johnson's background.
Lots more to potentially uncover. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.